Today we're talking about everybody's favorite zombie in 7 Days to Die, screamers. Let's get to it. So in one of my recent videos, I mentioned placing a whole bunch of dew collectors in order to farm lots of water. In the comments of that video, I had so many comments of people going, oh my god, that's going to attract so many screamers. Then I guess because I replied to those comments and said screamers in the comments, YouTube started suggesting videos about 7 Days to Die, specifically screamers. And it suggested one that I actually watched and I thought it was pretty good. I'll link it down below. There's some misinformation in it, but we'll cover that in a minute. But that whole video, with all of its tons and tons of views, was all about avoiding screamers. So apparently everybody is terrified of these things. Well, guess what? I'm here to tell you, you don't need to be scared of them, and they don't show up at your base nearly as much as you think they do. They literally can't. So sit back and buckle up, Buttercup, because by the time we're done this video, you're going to be doing everything you can to get screamers to spawn as often as possible. Now, in order to understand screamers, you need to understand heat. And heat is one of the things that in the aforementioned video was kind of misrepresented. You don't generate heat by every single thing you do. You can get into your storage, you're not going to generate heat. You can open and close wooden doors and you will not generate heat. Notice I said wooden doors because metal doors will generate heat. They do create sound. All of your crafting stations will generate heat, as do the dew collectors. Now, they all generate varying amounts of heat, and I'm not going to get into exactly how much heat they generate. This is going to be a broad overview of heat. If you want a more detailed video, let me know down there in the comments, but you don't need a lot of detail to understand how heat spawns screamers. We can see the amount of heat in a chunk. Each chunk has a separate amount of heat. It is chunk specific and specific to you from what I can tell. The reason I say this is because I've had heat go on cooldown, because heat does have a cooldown period once you hit the threshold for it, and I've gone to another chunk and I still had a cooldown. It wasn't the same as the cooldown in the other chunk, but I still had a cooldown in a neighboring chunk, which tells me that it is somewhat specific to me. So I digress. Using the admin commands, hitting F8 twice once you are in admin mode, you can see over here on the left of the screen, it is displaying our heat. Now let's explain what we're looking at. So the Act 1 there, I'm not 100% sure what that is or what changes that. I've had it up to 11 and I haven't noticed anything too different from the way everything works. It was still doing the same stuff. CH is the chunk that we are in. The percentage value you see there is our total percent of heat of everything that we have done that has generated heat. And the EVS is the total different actions that we have done that have generated heat. Now, this only displays 10 at a time, but it will continue to go up if you just go around doing tons of things. I've had it up to 12 before. You just don't see them. It just says 12 EVS. The main thing that we need to pay attention to here and that I want to explain to you is that percentage value. The wiki itself has a lot of correct information, but it has this part wrong. You do not need to hit 100% heat value in order to trigger a screamer to spawn. When your total value hits 25%, that's when you have a chance for a screamer to spawn. Now, I've tried a bunch of different variables here with the amount of EVS. I'm just going to call it EVES from now on. I've tried a bunch of different variables. I did like 5 of them, then triggered it, did 10 of them, then triggered it, 1, triggered it, and it doesn't appear that it matters how many of those there are. From what I can tell, it looks like it's a random chance every time, and you can tell when a screamer is going to spawn because the cooldown is different when a screamer spawns to when it doesn't spawn. Once you hit 25% or above, shortly after you hit above 25%, because it can go higher, but then it will trigger a cooldown after about a second. If that cooldown is 235 that you see there, it says 235 CD, that is not going to spawn a screamer. From what I can tell, that 235 is in seconds, so when you don't get a screamer, you have about a little over 3 minutes of cooldown time before your heat starts to build again. When the heat is on cooldown, you can't build heat. You can do whatever you want to do as loud as you want to do it, and you are not going to spawn a screamer. I assure you of this. I tested it very thoroughly. There is no heat generation, as you can see there on the screen right now. That's DevTools, that's Dev Menu, showing you there is no heat being generated. I should note here that this is if your base is within a single chunk. If you have set up on a fault line between two chunks and you are generating heat in both of those chunks, or maybe it's possible to be in 3 separate chunks, you're in a corner or something, it is possible to build heat in both of those chunks and get multiple screamers back to back. As I stated, it's random when they trigger, but it is very possible to trigger them back to back. So this is something you should be aware of. If you are getting screamers very frequently, like say 2 of them show up at your door doorstep, and then a few minutes later, 2 more of them show up at your doorstep, you're probably on a fault line between 2 chunks and you're building heat in 2 chunks separately. But if you are in and your base is in a single chunk, it is impossible once they have triggered to trigger them again within that chunk within this 20-minute cooldown time. Now, I do want to point out that heat does decay, and the wiki states that heat decay is influenced by game speed. It does not appear that this cooldown is affected by game speed at all. And I'm not going to get into heat decay on this video because we want screamers. Screamers are good. You should not worry about heat and or heat decay. I just wanted you to have a general understanding of how heat works, what creates it, so that you can understand the mechanics behind screamers spawning. Now, what does the cooldown look like if we do get a screamer? So we hit 25% here and we triggered a screamer. You can see here that the cooldown is 13:15. This means for roughly 21 minutes, you cannot spawn another screamer. You can go absolutely nuts with whatever firearm you want to go crazy with while you are fighting the horde that the screamers have spawned, and you are not going to generate more heat, and you will not get another screamer for at least 21 minutes. Now, as I stated, sometimes you will get the long cooldown and a screamer spawn, and other times you will get the short cooldown and no screamer spawn. And once it goes into cooldown, it resets everything and everything starts building heat from scratch again. Now, I'm pretty sure this is all put into place in order to keep people from farming screamers. This drastically slows it down and means that you can only get a screamer once every 21 minutes or so, and that's if you're lucky to roll one that often. On top of that, screamers can only scream so many times, and they'll only call in so many other screamers. So there's a limit to how big the horde can get that they will actually call in. Okay, so now you know heat's a thing. You don't really need to worry about it because at most you can only get a screamer every 21 minutes if you're super lucky. It's actually a little over 21 minutes, but let's just say 21 minutes for simplicity's sake. Now let's talk about why you should not fear screamers and you should want them to show up. First off, the screamers are never going to be more than what the game thinks you can handle based on your game stage. Now, a lot of what the screamers can do, specifically how many times they can scream and stuff like that, seems to be buried inside the game code and not in the XML files. However, how many zombies they can spawn based on the game stage that you're on, that is actually in an XML file. Funny enough, it's in the game stage's XML file, and you can go look at it. So for example, if your game stage is only at 8, the max number of zombies that can be alive at any given point of time from the screamer spawner, because the screamer is a spawner, is 9. The number that she spawns when she screams is 4 at a time. This means that she can only scream 3 times back to back to back, summoning 4 zombies, then 4 more, then 1. If you are in your base and you have a proper built base, and we'll talk about bases and being able to deal with screamers and stuff like that here in a minute. If you have a proper built base, even early on in the game, at that early of a game stage, that should not be a problem for you. Just the same as when you do a horde night, your horde night zombies that spawn are based on your game stage, so are the screamers, because they want you to be able to handle it and it be just hard enough that the game is fun for you. Which leads me to the next part of the horde and experience. Creating a base to efficiently farm the horde is like one of the big parts of this game, because that's when you can get a bunch of levels at the end of horde night. And levels are good, levels are what you want, because that increases your power. Especially if you've died a bunch and you have experience penalty turned on and you've taken a bunch of experience penalty, that additional experience is going to help you work that penalty off faster. It's also going to affect your game stage if you died a bunch, because every time you die, your game stage gets lowered. So therefore, your horde night is easier for you to handle, and so are, and say it with me now, the screamers. So the screamers are never going to be anything that you can't handle at any given point of time, and they are basically a mini horde night event that gives you a ton of experience if you can get the screamer to scream a bunch of times, if you get lucky. Sometimes they scream like crazy and summon a bunch of zombies. Sometimes they don't. So the screamers in the horde that they summon are experience just brought to your doorstep if you're at your base, and we'll talk more about not being at your base here in a second. And they're never going to be anything more than what you should be able to handle at your given game stage. So therefore, when you are at your base, you should never really worry about a screamer being spawned at all, because they're nothing but helpful. Now let's quickly talk about not being at your base, because they can spawn not at your base if you max out your heat in a given chunk. And you can max out heat in any chunk and cause a chance for a screamer or screamers to spawn. Doing things that are loud and noisy generate heat, as I stated before. So if you are mining, you're generating heat. If you are tearing through a building, breaking through a wall, breaking blocks, you generate heat. If you have your auger running, you're generating heat. If you're shooting your gun, you're generating heat. feet. Being out and about and having a screamer spawn is a much more dangerous situation that you should be aware of and prepared for, unlike being back at your base. If you're doing a very serious tier 6 or something like that POI, or a higher level POI than what you technically should be messing around in at a given point in time, and you manage to trigger a screamer spawn, that could be a bit of an issue. If this happens, your best bet, if you are not in a very safe situation, for example, you're in an attic and you hear one spawn down below and you can take out the ladder real quick or something like that, block up some stairs. If you're not in a good situation, abandon where you're at if they spawn. Go outside of the building so that you have room to move around and run away if you need to, and don't be afraid to fail the quest that you're in and leave the area if need be. It's much better to take the fail on the quest and farm the horde that the screamer is going to spawn than it is to die and end up with an experience penalty. You can run back to base or run to the nearest trader or any other place where you can find some type of respite to get away from the horde, to reset and prepare and put yourself in a situation that makes it easy for you to deal with the horde that was spawned. I realize there's a lot of new people out there playing this game, so for those of you who are new and don't know how to make a proper base, let's talk about a very simple base setup to be able to handle dealing with screamers and their horde that they may spawn. First off, you don't need a massive footprint for a base. You can use something that is relatively small and use that as your base structure, or build a relatively small base structure and build up instead of out and wide. The reason to do this is so that you can trench down into the ground and basically make a moat around your structure. This does a few things. This gives a pit for the zombies to fall into. Now, one thing I do want to point out is you do want to make a way out of that pit for them, and I'll explain how you can set them into a loop here in a minute, but you do always want to have a way outside of the pit, because even if you don't have them set to a loop exploiting their AI, you can jump back and forth into your base area where they can't get to you, and then back outside or run back outside, and I'll show you a block that you can use that they don't see as path that you can easily run over, and that will cause them to basically just chase you back and forth, being confused instead of just tunneling underneath of your base. So the smaller the footprint, the better. Something like a small 9x9 block size is pretty easy to dig down into and create a moat. You want that moat to be 3 deep and 3 wide. They can't jump 3 block distance in either direction. So once they fall into a 3 block wide and 3 block high pit, they will just start to tunnel to try to get to you if they can't get to you any other way. Okay, so let's talk about how you can make it easy for yourself to cross back and forth across this pit without having to worry about the zombies chasing you into your base. All you need to do is use the block labeled pole, the one that shows there in the corner. Then you want to go to advanced rotation and orientate it so that it is facing horizontal, and then you just place it across the gap like so. And as you can see, the zombie doesn't see it as a path. Now let's talk about how you can get them to essentially just run in a loop. You want to ensure that you have a solid path out of the trench that you have dug. I advise using at least wood blocks to create a ramp up and out of it. Then you want to use the block called wedge 60 tip, and you want that facing downwards, as you can see from the clip, and then just place that across the gap. Next, you want to get the block called cube 1/2, and you're going to place that 3 high across the top of the wedge pieces that you just placed facing downwards. Next, you want the block called wedge 60 tip 1/2 right, and you are going to place that on the very top facing outwards to create a sloped out situation. This prevents them from stacking. If they were to stack, that will cause them to slip backwards and fall off of each other. They shouldn't stack, but if they do, this prevents that. Now just upgrade those as much as you can upgrade them for whatever game stage you're in. One thing I do want to point out here is ensure that you're not connecting them just to dirt in this gap. Make sure that they are spanned between 2 block structures. If you just try to connect them to the soil on both sides, they won't have proper support. So just put in a block that is level with the ground on both sides. And do note that this trick, while it will cause them to run in a loop, is not perfect in this specific situation, because at only 3 deep, it's not deep enough or far enough from you to prevent them from going into rage mode where they will just attack random stuff. However, you can just shoot them when they're doing that, and usually they'll get out of it and try to come back around to get you again, and it'll put them back in the loop. This is not designed as something to just be a permanent situation to keep them in a forever loop. It's designed to buy you time to allow you to handle them in order to deal with them. And then you just run repairs as necessary afterwards. Once you're able to, I also advise at least plating the wall towards your base on that side wherever you have this specific setup set up. And that's basically all there is to it. From that point, you can put in traps, traps, turrets, spikes, barbed wire, whatever you want to put in there to help you deal with whatever's going to come at you. As I stated earlier, you're only going to get what your game stage can handle. If you're not doing well, you're not going to get some insane horde spawned by the screamers. If you're doing absolutely fantastic, you're probably going to get a bunch of wily zombies showing up at your doorstep, but you should be able to handle them if you're doing that well. And now you just have free delivery service of experience to your base. Screamers are essentially the experience Uber of 7 Days to Die, bringing you free levels, and all you had to do was the same stuff you're going to do anyway around your base. So don't fear them, don't worry about them, make sure you have a proper base setup to handle dealing with them, and enjoy them when they show up, because killing zombies is always a good time. Alright, hopefully you all enjoyed this video, found it informational and helpful. If you did, please consider hitting the subscribe button and notification bell so you may be notified when I upload other videos. If you're looking for some more of my 7 Days to Die content, you can find a link to another one of my videos on the screen right now. I want to give an absolute massive shout out and thank you to all of my channel supporters for helping to keep these videos sponsor free. You all are absolutely amazing people. If you would like to become an official channel supporter, check out the links in the description below. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a comment down below. Let me know what you thought. If you're shy, you don't like to comment, just hit that thumbs up button and share your support. Until next time, thanks for watching.